Everyone, we're going to get started now. Representative Auchincloss is also working on legislation right now to modernize the FDA. So I'm sure there's going to be some people here, Representative, that want to give you their feedback. So everybody listen closely, and if there's anything that comes to mind and how to improve or support Representative Auchincloss's proposal, think of those, and we'll make sure to get to those ideas. So take it away.
Representative Auchincloss, good, lights on. It's wonderful you could join us to talk about some of the efforts that you're proposing in Congress and get the perspective of people here in the longevity space. Congressman Auchincloss is representative for the 4th District and sits on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. He's one of Congress's most active voices on healthcare and FDA modernization, hence the topic, and is author of a discussion draft called Next Generation U.S. Clinical Development to Accelerate Cures. And the aim there is to modernize clinical development in the U.S. By turning breakthroughs more quickly into real therapies via a number of specific reforms. So Congressman, we're thrilled to have you here today to talk about this. And before we get into all the questions and the applications to our field, I'd love it if you could tell us what's on the table.
R&D, it's both personal and professional. Personally, I grew up in a family of physician scientists, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, and watch them submit grants to the NIH and go through FDA approvals and do basic research. And so I know the labor, the ingenuity, the joy of scientific discovery, and have tremendous respect for it. And then I represent a district, Newton, Brookline, Needham, Wellesley, Sharon, Franklin, all the suburbs of Boston, where so many of these biotech entrepreneurs and investors work and live. And we start biotechs on the sidelines of soccer games in Massachusetts, and it's the hub of biomedical R&D. And for all the hype that AI is getting and the center of gravity developing in Silicon Valley for the frontier models, I think this is the century of biology. And I think that so much of that story will be written in the greater Kendall Square area. So I'm very passionate about that work. And then the bill that I'm working on, bipartisan legislation for better, faster, cheaper clinical trials. And it's really 3 big things. One is faster FDA and IRB approvals for proof of concept stage, so preclinical and phase 1, including porting over the Australia model for CTN. Number 2 is clinical trial infrastructure. So actually at the point of care, how do you make it easier to recruit, enroll, document individuals? Because a single-digit percentage of American patients really ever even cross the transom of a clinical trial entry point in this country right now. We just miss out on a lot of opportunities. And then number 3 is harmonization of international standards around clinical trials.
Awesome, that's great. So it sounds like you have a very intuitive understanding of some of these barriers that are in the current clinical trial process. And each of the initiatives that you just mentioned here, each of the parts of the proposal is meant to address a very specific problem. So I'd like to talk about a few of those. So for one of the key ones that I think is very relevant to the group here is this idea of phase 1 clinical trials, early POC trials, getting those off the ground. And there are a lot of us who do think very hard or actually do go to other countries to do this.
Yep.
So tell us about what you think the gap was there and how you're hoping to address it.
Yeah, I think the gap is really the first 2 things I described, which is too much time and uncertainty at the FDA and IRB level, and then also just too much pain to do patient recruitment. Not so much the healthy volunteers, but those with the condition itself. It's not that the FDA's standards are kind of too high, and this is a nuanced point that I think we really have to double down on. It's not high standards or onerous standards that are really fundamentally the problem. It's uncertainty and it's feedback time. innovators want high standards, but they want upfront certainty about biomarkers and by what does success look like. Work with me about what success looks like here. Let's agree on that. Don't change the goalpost on me 7 years from now. And then do that in a rapid and iterative fashion. Don't do that with me on a Zoom call where your screen's off and then I have to wait another 6 months for another Zoom call. Like, be a partner with me.
Or not even on Zoom calls. Often it's just written.
Yeah. Like, be a partner with me on thinking about this. That's the FDA side. And then the IRB side is, I think too often you've got a little bit of a make-work bureaucracy problem where you get a bunch of clever people, a lot of lawyers in a room together, and you're like, hey, should we have more rules? And they're like, yes, we should. Because that's what they do. And I work in Washington, D.C., so I'm very familiar with this phenomenon. If you get enough clever people in a room and ask them to make rules and ask questions, they're going to make rules and ask questions. And at a certain point, you need kind of you have to introduce some tension about, like, well, what is the net effect of all these rules and questions? Are we actually getting to safety and efficacy faster? That's what we care about. So you need a little bit of a bureaucratic climb down.
I think you've said there's a way in which every academic medical center is its own mini FDA.
That's exactly it. It's a decentralized FDA. And the academic medical centers, listen, I represent Massachusetts. We love them. And that physician scientist who shuttles between the clinic and the laboratory is the vector of biomedical innovation. So I have profound respect and very protective of our academic medical centers. But I think they operate sometimes too much like a fiefdom over the clinical trial infrastructure. And I think there is a role here to be investing in a clinical trial infrastructure that isn't going to be as cheap as China's is, but I would like it to have some of the same throughput, have some of the same speed that China does.
There's an extent to which, the FDA obviously has a rigorous process, and we all go into these trials expecting to have to go through that FDA process, and we plan for it. But then if you want to run a trial at specific academic medical centers, the timelines can be just as long and the process just as onerous, right?
Yeah.
And so honestly, in many cases, we're all motivated to avoid the academic medical center because we know the timelines are super long, and that's exactly where you want the innovation to be happening. We'd love to be working there, but there's this tension.
Yeah.
So I think we would all be grateful to decrease the bureaucracy there. And what's the mechanism by which the proposal would decrease bureaucracy at the academic medical centers, or is that more of a hope for the future?
No, it's really so at the FDA, it's compressing the preclinical and phase 1 timelines and sort of parallelizing some of the requirements. And then what it's trying to do is at the sites of care is through pilots and through data infrastructure investment, just make it easier for more sites of care to also be clinical trial enrollment sites. Because right now, it's really not within the incentive structure of most sites of care to be doing clinical trial enrollment and management. And I think if you introduce some of that competition, you create a little bit of incentive structure for the current sites of clinical trial enrollment to do a better job. And then we also have some things in the bill about IRB, kind of, a reverse ratchet in the IRB bureaucracy. Master templates and so forth.
I think it'd be wonderful to have some simplification there. So what you're trying to do here is, not a small thing, not a band-aid. It's more changing incentives, structural shifts. What do you think is if everything goes as planned, this gets passed, 5-10 years from now, what do you think? What are you hoping this will achieve?
Well, let me tell you what it's not going to achieve, and what I don't think it should try to achieve, which is to replace Chinese or Australian clinical trial. This is a live debate. Basically, everybody in Washington broadly agrees, better, faster, cheaper clinical trials. That's a good thing. That one we have some pretty vigorous agreement on. The actual point of debate, and it's not really a partisan debate, it's sort of it's within both parties actually, is should we be banning Chinese clinical trial data altogether? Should we add China to the Coins Act and really make it impossible to get data from Chinese sites of care? I personally think that would be a mistake. There's 5 steps in the value chain of biomedical R&D. It's discovery, it's proof of concept, it's global safety and efficacy studies, it's commercialization, and it's manufacturing. And if you look at those 5 steps in the value chain, right now, China, what they've really come to where they've landed and are doing a really strong job is on that proof of concept step.
Yep.
And in economic terms, you would say that discovery and proof of concept are complementary goods, which means if one gets cheaper, the other one also becomes more attractive to invest in or to buy. Well, what does that mean then? That means that if proof of concept becomes sort of I don't want to quite say a coin-operated machine, but pretty darn close to Chinese. If it becomes much more cheap, you're actually going to get more discovery then because it's complementary good if proof of concept has gotten more affordable. Well, again, I represent Massachusetts. The discovery is what we do. We do 0 to 1, right? I think that could potentially be a good bet. Now, there are some very smart people who disagree with me very vehemently, right? Who think that the Chinese are going to devour Kendall Square. And I respect that point of view, and I'm alive to being disagreed with, and maybe I'm missing something. And I hope people, I want to continue to be challenged on that because it's really important that we get it right. But my thesis right now is so long as the quality of the data coming out of Chinese clinical trials is high quality, and the FDA should be able to do surprise inspection. We don't have to consider them doing a good job on one step of the value chain as impeding U.S. dominance of other steps in that value chain. And the most important to me would be discovery and manufacturing. We should be the best in the world at discovery, and also we got to control much more of the manufacturing because that creates choke point leverage.
So in that context, you're thinking that a lot of this innovation still will be happening in other places. We want to be the best we can at being complementary to those things that exist already.
Our proof of concept clinical trials, like it's not acceptable for America to be bad at it, right? We're not going to compete with the Chinese on cost for proof of concept. It's just not going to happen. I think it's a little unrealistic to claim that it's going to happen. What we should compete with the Chinese on is time. Most of these investors and entrepreneurs are perfectly happy to pay a premium dollar. They're not perfectly happy to wait 3 years long.
You mentioned earlier the uncertainty piece, and I think that's a key deciding factor for investors, for entrepreneurs, and timelines. So I think uncertainty and timelines are things that chase money away from an area.
100%.
And I think that's actually, it's a very nice link to longevity because those are some of the things that are barriers for longevity biotech companies trying to get their initial funding. They have a great idea out of a awesome lab, for example, and the biology is really compelling. We have a mechanism that's upstream. It's going to prevent or treat multiple diseases. Who wouldn't want that? Very strong argument. But the problem is uncertainty in terms of what's the exact regulatory path, which you alluded to. What are the exact standards you're going to be held to, and timelines. And so if we can shorten timelines, if we increase regulatory certainty, I think everyone here in this room would really welcome that. And so I'd love to turn a little bit to the longevity angle in the conversation and talk about a couple things. First of all, just take a step back and talk about economics. You mentioned that your bill is bipartisan, your proposal is bipartisan, and it gets at things that everyone can agree on. And I just sort of was talking about what we all want to achieve in the longevity space, which is longer, healthier lives for everyone. Longer period where you're actually healthy. That's an increasing health span. And that feels like a very strongly bipartisan issue. And it feels like the kind of thing that could motivate a lot of effort in Congress to try to adapt the regulatory system to be more welcoming to multi-morbidity type indications and efforts, and potentially unlock funding for those sorts of things. What do you think about the appetite in Congress for this kind of issue that A4 Ally is advocating for, and that would be relevant to biotechs in this room?
Yeah, I mean, I think longer health spans, new medicines, new treatments, like Americans want all that stuff. I think what I would be cautious of is claims about saving money for the health system. This is something that we run into a lot with issues regarding extensions of health spans or lifespans. Is the Congressional Budget Office views the world a little differently, and people ultimately die of something, and preventing them from dying of one thing doesn't mean they don't die of another thing, and it also doesn't mean that they're not, costing money into the system in that interim. And so there's just a lot of there's a lot of second and third order effects that you have to untangle. And so I think
So keeping people healthy is good. Keeping people productive is good.
Yes.
Compressing morbidity, like having less absolute time sick is good, because that costs money.
Right. Like the from the federal, from the sort of Medicare, Medicaid perspective in terms of expenditures, right? You want people healthy and productive right until their last day, right? Like that rectangle as opposed to like a strong, long decline. And so I think of this in particular about the disjunction between physical health and cognitive health, right? If we do things that keep people physically healthy for a long time, but Alzheimer's persists on its present trend rate. Right now we have 15 million Americans projected to have Alzheimer's by the year 2050. If we're adding 5 to 7 years to their lifespans and even their physical health spans, but not their cognitive health spans, that's a very different story than if they're.
I think we in this room feel that very strongly. That's the whole thing we're working on, is saying let's not treat one disease and have the rest of the person be very sick and unwell. And we're passionate about things like cognitive health, like physical health. That's actually many older people are just actually cognitively healthy, because of the inverse of what you described. Cognitively healthy, but physically disabled. They can't do their daily activities. They can't drive a car anymore. They can't walk around without falling. And so they're cognitively healthy, but and so there's people in the firm working on muscle health, bone health, things which are not as traditional disease indications. And so I think we feel passionately in the aging space about keeping the whole person healthy. You haven't achieved your goal if you haven't kept the whole person healthy. So I think there's a lot of, I resonate with what you were saying. And so less time sick is good, but also just additional time healthy. That's additional productive time. We're having conversations about the longevity dividend, where every additional healthy year if you could extend the average working lifespan of Americans by 1 year, it has tremendous economic impacts, trillions, either $3 or $1 trillion, I think, per year.
Well, moral dividends too, right? I mean, I knew 3 out of my 4 grandparents, and I've always been grateful for that and want the same for my kids. 100%. And I'm sure many people feel the same way.
Yeah, Mehmet Oz was here today, and he made the same comment, both on the economic and on, we all feel this very, very viscerally. If your grandparents could be around 1 more healthy year. So I think it's something we'd all like. So it would be great to talk now about the overlap with the bill and like longevity efforts. So one thing that I believe in the bill is innovations around biomarkers and getting the biomarkers approved and surrogate endpoints. And that's the kind of thing that we're very interested here, because we're interested in long-term outcomes. Are you cognitively healthy for a long time? Are you alive, years from now? And it's really expensive and time-consuming to run those trials. It's actually a disincentive for the whole industry. Investors are less willing to fund a drug where they know the ultimate trial is going to be a 10-year, 10,000-person study. That's a no-go. So I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about biomarkers and endpoints.
You would know better than me, but my understanding is that this is probably the great unlock for this industry, right? Is that confidence around a biomarker.
If we could have biomarkers we were really confident about, I think it's a really lofty goal. But if we could achieve it, absolutely.
Right, because the trials and the kind of trials that you're describing, 10 years, 10,000, my bill doesn't keep those from being spent. That's still going to be very upset.
I mean, you can go less than that, but that's
however strong it is. But this is something that, as you said, my bill sort of pushes the FDA towards that. But actually, the FDA can and should be doing this without congressional nudge. It already has the statutory authority necessary. They can lean on the Reagan-Udall Foundation, for example, to do industry partnerships to come up with a biomarker roadmap. They can take examples from things like the Center of Excellence for Oncology, or at the Device Center, what they did there, where it's really sort of not just within the FDA expertise, but also with the NIH and with industry to come up with roadmaps that create that certainty. Like, this is all within the realm of the FDA's current mandate. Sometimes it's helpful for Congress to give you kind of a push, but it's one of my hopes that the FDA's new leadership, we'll see what it is, will do this kind of work. To be candid, over the last 18 months, the FDA, it was in survival mode under Marty McCary, the worst FDA commissioner in history, on the warpath to get that guy fired. And now that he's gone, hopefully this agency can rebuild itself and regain some of the competence and credibility that it lost.
I think we're all waiting to see. Yeah, it'd be great. So the FDA has recently signaled an openness to, one pivotal trial for approval for drugs.
Yeah.
We'll see. I guess if that continues, but that kind of implies that you can have one pivotal trial, and then you can rely more on post-marketing monitoring and establishing health and safety sort of definitively after the fact, or confirming it, let's say, after the fact. Do you think there's a role there for longevity therapies? We're trying to extend healthy lifespan, and the trial would take 3, 5, 10 years. Could we get it approved for something else first, and then have some aspect where post-marketing surveillance allows that indication to be expanded?
On the precise indications, that's really for the FDA regulators to decide, not for me. What I will say is that the way that this 2-to-1 when it was gone, it actually created more uncertainty, not less. Because already, as many of you will know, there already was the option for FDA to do one trial. It went from 2-to-1 to, then they said 1-to-2, but they announced this policy in like a journal article as opposed to the rulemaking process. And so at the end of it, industry was like, well, actually, now we have less certainty, because now we don't know when you need 2 and then you need 1, so this isn't helpful.
Certainty is definitely
so certainty
important.
matters. Do it through the normal rulemaking process. Like, we have a way to do this. You get stakeholder input. You take some time. Like, just do this like grown-ups. And then the post-market surveillance, I'm receptive to it. The problem is we don't actually have a great track record on post-market real-world evidence collection and surveillance. It's not something that I think FDA and CMS have done a great job of. And so that process has to be tightened up significantly, I think, because a lot of times there's a lot of evidence that it's not actually happening, even though there are being promises that are being made for it.
Worried about our timeline. How much time do we have? 5 minutes? Okay. So let's do maybe one more question and then go to audience questions. So one thing, we're all here concerned about biotech innovation in aging. And the root of all that is research, like the research that you grew up around. It's sort of well known that, at least in our field, that only 1% of the NIH budget goes towards research on aging. And given this sort of, bipartisan argument that, we'd all like to live longer, healthier, we'd all like the emotional benefit of that, we'd like the economic benefit of that, we'd love to hear your advice on how we could, improve federal funding for aging research and other aging initiatives.
Well, number one, we got to protect the NIH right now. So this administration tried to cut its budget by 40%. Congress fought it off. They've been bullying immigrant scientists for the last 18 months. We are trying to fight that off, but it's a rearguard effort, and we're losing some of our best and brightest. I mean, the people who are saying that we should ban Chinese clinical trial data, a much, much better way for us to compete with China is not to send all of our best scientists to China in the first place, or to Europe for that matter. So I'm just immensely frustrated with that. Now, regrettably, we have the single biggest threat to the NIH of this administration, which is Russ Vought's Uniform Grants Regulations proposal, which would replace peer review with politics in how grants are dispersed. I cannot stress enough, this is a asteroid heading toward the U.S. biomedical enterprise. I really would hope all of you would engage in the rulemaking process to push back on this. The idea that politicians get to decide what grants go out the door and not the peer review system, which needs improvement, but boy, is it better than,
we can all agree on that. Yeah.
a bunch of appointees doing it. So please fight back. And then we got to increase the funding at the NIH. After World War II, we were spending 5% of GDP on R&D as a country overall. NIH is a big part of that. Nowadays, it's more like 2%, 2.5%. We're well behind countries that we like to think of as our pacing peers on R&D, like Taiwan and Israel and South Korea. They're all spending 5 to 6%. So we just got to massively increase the budget for this. And we also should do some NIH reform and modernization. We should do more high-risk research. We should think about golden tickets and ways that you help younger investigators with bolder contrarian ideas get funding. So this is a way of saying, I'm less concerned about a specific area or indication and more concerned about, one, protect the money, protect the peer review, but then also allow for paradigm shifting ideas. Because fundamentally, you're in the business of a paradigm shifting idea.
Yeah.
And as we all know, like science, like every other field, is very protective of the status quo. And if you want disruption to the status quo, you need to allow a process where more contrarian ideas are fielded.
Thanks. Before we go to questions, you have an RFI right now.
Yeah, closes today, actually. Or today? Tomorrow? Today.
So is there any time for anyone here to still participate?
Yeah, it's midnight today.
Midnight today, okay. And so what could we, people might want to share their ideas, what could they do?
Yeah, it's on my website, and we have a form to submit your feedback on the bill, and tell me where I'm wrong. I mean, there's no try to off the ship here. This is a discussion draft because we want to have a discussion. Very complicated issue. I have done 0 clinical trials in my life, so I'm trying to listen to smart people, but we obviously don't have all the answers in this bill. So come and tell me what you think needs to be included.
Hi, thanks so much for being here to talk to us. I'm a founder of a company that is developing a novel therapeutic for a category-defining indication that doesn't exist today. And so a lot of what you talked about in modernization and innovation really resonates for me. And it strikes me that one of the key uncertainties we face as we're preparing for our first FDA interaction is not around, will FDA guidance today be the same 7 years from now? Because we'll find new things and the data will change our mind probably. It's actually more about, will the FDA be a partner for us in that time? And how long will it take, right, for us to have these conversations? How will we be able to have these conversations with the FDA as the data comes in and as our minds are changed by what we see on the ground? Is there, I have not read your bill, I have to admit, but is there any thinking around kind of how to make those, modernize the conversations by making them happen faster and more as a partnership?
Yeah. I mean, presumably you have like an initial indication that you're thinking about.
Yes, absolutely we do. We can define it. It's just, we're developing a therapeutic for gray hair. It's not a disease today, but it's an indication. There's, you can measure it, right?
Yeah, that biomarker will be easy.
It is a biomarker we're developing.
Why wouldn't? So, short answer is in my bill, yes. There is. It's set up as a pilot within the bill to try to get the FDA to be sort of more of an early stage partner. Again, you don't actually need statutory authority for this. Like the FDA can do this, and it's had leaders in the past, like Scott Gottlieb, that did do this, right? So a lot of this is leadership and culture, but bipartisan congressional helps, right? Well, I guess for gray hair, I'm curious, why wouldn't the FDA, like that actually strikes me as something the FDA would be very well positioned to consult on. They would say, here's what success looks like, and here's like.
I hope so. As I said, we're preparing for our first interaction, a pre-IND meeting this summer, and we'll find out. But, there's no validated biomarker for hair pigmentation density today. We're developing that. So
you can't just do an observation, or isn't that just something you measure?
You can do it photographically, but the details are very, very kind of nuanced once you get into it. And how do you know that you're measuring exactly the same hair follicles, and how do you measure how pigmented they are, and will it work for people with blonde hair as well as people with black hair and things like that? So there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into it. We're developing this as a clinical biomarker that we will validate in the clinic, for example. But no one's done this before, and so I can't guarantee, and I don't expect the FDA to guarantee, that the plan we have today is going to be the one that gets approved in our pivotal trial, 2 or 3 years from now, right?
Yeah.
What I want from the FDA is not to tell me today, oh yeah, your plan is great, we will be able to approve it. That seems ridiculous on its face. What I want is for them to be able to tell me, let's work together to figure out how to, right? So is that process
Totally.
something you're
That's what
thinking
we
about?
want. Because step one is like, hey, let's make sure it's safe. And then once we make sure it's safe, we can figure out what the proof of concept is on efficacy together, like step 2, right? Yeah, well, that is exactly, it's a great example of the kind of thing that we want to, partnership is exactly the right word. And it's not about lower standards. I think that's something that people sometimes mistake. We want really high, in fact, it's a competitive advantage for America to have the highest standards in the world, scientifically grounded. It's about fast, certain feedback loops. And that's something that gets reinforced, I think, frequently. This is kind of more of a question, because I'm over my skis here a little bit, but one thing the FDA always is talking about is this contrast between, or this tension between Bayesian statistics for how they evaluate and the Bernoullian statistics that they mostly use. And it strikes me that shifting more towards Bayesian statistics would help them be that partner, that more certain partner, because Bayesian statistics probably is better set up to do biostatistics. But you tell me, you work in this field.
There's a lot more creative things you can do with Bayesian statistics, for sure. It's been interesting that the FDA has signaled more interest in that. I think it would actually be a great, if the FDA was more obviously in favor of it, it would allow innovation in the field, because it's something where there's a lot of academic reviewers, even a lot of just people in the field are skeptical of that. And so when you submit to the FDA, you want to do something you know is going to be accepted. And so I think there's hesitancy to do these super creative things, because the feedback loops are too long. It's not easy to have a partnership about exactly what it's not a standard design. Really.
My understanding with Bayesian, would it help with the sample size issue and how long it takes? Like you would be able to get tighter, you'd be able to get faster feedback on how things were going, right?
Yeah, there are definitely designs where you can, like within a phase 1 trial, you can iterate, you can have multiple groups. There's a lot of flexibility. But the flexibility is also the problem, because then, what's the standard? It's not the same objective standard. Well, it gets into a lot of philosophy, actually, as to what's an objective standard. But anyway, it's great that you're interested. It sounds like we've had some discussion about feedback loops. I think we'd all appreciate, honestly, fast, efficient communication, and that would benefit all of us.
Great. Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah, likewise.
Mhm.